To answer your coronavirus questions this morning are Dr. Mohammed Munir, a virologist at Lancaster University, and Dr. Deepti Gordasani, who's a clinical epidemiologist at Queen Mary University of London. You're both very welcome. Thank you very much for your time this morning in answering our viewers' questions. The first one is for you, Dr. Gordasani, and it's from Wayne on Twitter, who asks, in light of the increased transmissibility of the virus, this new variant of the virus, why hasn't the wearing of masks been made mandatory? And if people can't wear one, shouldn't they have to wear a face shield?
Yes, I think the high transmissibility of this virus is certainly a concern, and it's true that we might need more restrictive or stronger control measures to reduce transmission. So I do think that we need more widespread mask wearing in response to this. Regarding face shields, we know that they're not as effective as masks, but of course, if a person cannot wear a mask, a face shield may be able to provide some degree of protection. So I agree with you that we certainly need more widespread mask wearing and a culture of mask wearing, particularly in light of recent events.
Certainly countries that have done better in getting a grip of this virus, they tend to have had a culture of mask wearing when there are outbreaks of respiratory illnesses, haven't they?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've seen this in Southeast Asia, where who have been far more successful in controlling the virus, and we know that this virus is transmitted not just through droplet but also aerosol transmission, and masks act to reduce transmission in this context.
Okay, the next question is from Vivian for you, Dr. Munir, and Vivian asks, if you have antibodies for previous strains of coronavirus, do they protect you from the new variant? Interesting question.
Yeah, well, the short answer is yes, these will protect. And the extended answer is that when somebody is infected with any virus, not only the antibodies, but there are array of the immune responses that are raised, like T cell responses, other white blood cells, complement, and there are other component of the immune system. So even if the antibodies are having relatively weaker responses against the new variant, other component of the immune system would act and would neutralize the virus. So
But we don't know yet how long that immunity lasts for. We've been hearing that a lot, haven't we?
Yes, absolutely. That is something that we don't precisely know, but based on our experiences with other coronaviruses, likelihood is that the antibodies or the immune priming component against the SARS-2 would remain at least for 18 months.
Okay, the next question is from Charles, for you, Deepti. Charles asks, as the virus particles are heavier than air, they will ultimately end up on the ground and be distributed on people's feet to indoor areas, whereas dust, they will then get blown around by vacuum cleaners, heaters and other appliances with fans, and particularly hand dryers in public buildings, he writes. Should we not be doing more to sterilize our streets as they did in China?
So the modes of transmission of this virus we know are primarily aerosol and droplet. Of course, there's the question of contaminated surfaces as well. And while we don't know much about transmission from contaminated surfaces, currently the CDC does recommend sterilization or disinfection, rather, of indoor areas that are frequently visited, with disinfectant solutions, etc. In terms of fans and dryers and vacuum cleaners, etc. Yes, they can increase sort of circulation of air and lead to the virus being transmitted over longer distances. So currently, the CDC actually recommends that those sort of devices are not used while people are indoors, and for example, vacuuming is done when there's nobody indoors with the protective equipment needed. In terms of street disinfection, we don't actually know what the effectiveness of an intervention like that is. I mean, we have to remember that even between disinfections, there will be spread of aerosols on streets and outdoors. Rather than do blanket disinfection of streets, which is complex and hard to do and may not be as effective, it's much better to actually perform hygiene measures for oneself and also wear masks to prevent transmission.
Because even if streets were cleaned, presumably that would only last for seconds potentially, because then more people come along potentially carrying the virus, and therefore the whole exercise of cleaning the streets in the first place is a pretty pointless one. One might argue. I don't know what you would say on that.
Exactly. I think that has been argued, and that's why it's something that's not being widely practiced here, because it is unlikely to be effective, as you say, longer than a few minutes, because air will keep circulating, people will keep coming in, and even in terms of disinfection, we don't know how effective it is in terms of disinfection outside, because there's a lot of dust and inorganic matter in sunlight, which does actually interfere with disinfection. So it's much better to take personal precautions rather than having to disinfect entire streets.
Okay, Mohammed, this question for you from Craig. And Craig asks, we have a new variant of COVID-19 that has been discovered. Why is this coronavirus being called a variant of COVID-19 and not COVID-20? How much does a virus have to mutate before it's a different virus?
Yes, very, very interesting question. The thing is that this virus is pretty big. I mean, it has 30,000 nucleotides. Those are the spelling that make the genetic material of this virus. And we have noticed only 23 mutation in this one, which make only 0.007%. So this means vast majority of the virus is still the same. So when we call a variant means it has different than the regular strain with few aspects, but not everything is identical. So this means that if this new variant, if it is causing more transmissibility of the disease, yet it is not causing severity of the disease or impact onto the vaccine efficacy. So this would still remain within the same group of the viruses, even if it is changing significantly. But coming back to the point that how much viruses have to change to call it a new disease or the new virus, is that viruses have to mutate significantly before they become at the stage where we class them as a new virus or into the new family of the viruses, which is really happening. So even if this mutate any further, this would still remain into the same family, same virus. It would still call coronavirus.
Okay, so just to reiterate then, because this particular variant actually is essentially very, very similar to the original virus. That's why we certainly hope that vaccines will still be as effective on it as well.
That is absolutely right, because
okay.
It's a very tiny difference compared to the full length of the virus.
Okay, that's good to know, good to confirm. Deepti, a question from Mags, who asks, do they know how many of yesterday's 37,000 positive cases contain the new variant?
I think the answer to that is they may know. I certainly don't. So how we pick up this variant is two ways. So one is through actual genomic surveillance, where, for example, 10% of all samples are sequenced so that we can observe whether these particular mutations exist there or not. The other way that we are able to pick this up is through a phenomena with regular testing, which is called spike dropout. So with the routine tests we do, which are PCR tests, the readout is slightly different with this virus because of certain mutations in a particular protein in the virus. And just with regular tests, looking at the frequency of that change, or what's called spike dropout, we can estimate what the frequency of this mutation may be. Based on the publicly available data, it appears that in Southeast England, about 60 to 70% of of infections were being attributed to this virus, but that's again based on a random sample that was sequenced. In terms of spike dropout, at the moment, I don't think daily data is being released. So at the moment, I couldn't tell you how many cases are exactly attributed to this particular viral strain.
Okay, a question, Mohammed, from Shaza, who asks, if antibodies protect people from coronavirus, why would we vaccinate people who already have them? Should the vaccination only be given to people who don't have antibodies?
Well, that's again a very interesting question. When we are infected with a virus, we certainly raise antibody responses against them. But we don't really know whether those antibodies are sufficient enough to neutralize the virus if it come across through the natural course of infection. So therefore, it is important even people who are initially infected and recovered to be vaccinated, because vaccine induces very profound immune responses. And more on to the logistical challenges is that if somebody need to be screened, say we have 70 million people in the UK, if everybody need to be screened for the antibodies and to determine whether those antibodies are good enough to protect against the infection, that is probably impossible. And the simple and the cheaper option is to vaccinate everybody, and that is current recommendation by Public Health England and the government, is that even people who are infected before before and recovered, they still need to be vaccinated.
Okay, we've got about a minute and a half left. I'm going to try to squeeze in 2 more questions. So brief answers, please. Deepti, Adam asks, we have heard that the vaccine will still protect against the new variant, but will there be any impact on the accuracy of testing?
So, as I said before, with PCR testing, which is the usual test that's used to confirm infection, we see a difference in readout, but we are able to confirm infection, so it doesn't affect accuracy. With lateral flow tests, we actually don't know at the moment, and that's an area that's actively under investigation, I believe.
Okay, a very clear answer, very concise. Mohammed from Kathy, we're being told this mutation is more transmissible, but I've not heard exactly how it does this. Is it capable of surviving longer on surfaces?
Well, we know out of 23 mutations, 2 of the mutations are very important, and those mutations are at the site that allow the virus to enter into our body. So therefore, it is more transmissible because it enters into body more frequently, and therefore it is more fitter to replicate. Based on those mutations, the structure of the spike protein is not changed in such a way that it will make the virus more stable on the surfaces. So therefore, all the disinfectant we are using now would be applicable onto the new variant.
Okay, great to have you both with us today. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise in answering those questions. Dr. Mohammed Munir from Lancaster University and Dr. Deepti Gurdasani from Queen Mary University in London. Thank you very much, and thanks to you for sending in your questions.